I think the one thing for the oldest is there's no one else setting the tone for, like, when anything is going on. Yeah. And so it's good to just be kind of in the loop with other moms and parents and talking about what other kids their age are going through. Right. Because there's really no one else there for support.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. Here on the podcast, I share my experiences raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 16 to 26 and working with thousands more as a summer camp director over the past 3 decades. I'm the author of Happy Campers, and I frequently do workshops with parents, teachers, and summer camp professionals about social skills, connection, and happiness, topics I researched extensively for my master's in psychology. If you want tools for raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults, you've come to the right place. Hey, Sunshine Parenting listeners, and welcome to episode 161, which is first being released on Friday, October 16th, 2020. My one simple thing tip for this week came from my daughter Gretchen, who's also a guest on this week's podcast. And it's a really good idea. Normally we all like to set, or at least in my family, we like to set these really lofty goals for the whole year. And of course, this year's goals are all pretty much up in smoke due to COVID. So what Gretchen is doing now is just setting really realistic, super short-term, week-long goals. And I really like that. And it's kind of like what I do in my planner anyway. So instead of looking at huge things, just thinking of like maybe one step towards a project or one little piece of it that can be the goal for the week. So that's this week's one simple thing tip. If you enjoy the one simple thing tips I share here on my podcast and in my book, then you may be interested in the special PDF resource that is only for my Patreon members. For October, I'm putting together a compilation of my favorite one simple thing tips, because all of us could use some simple strategies right about now for creating a little more happiness and connection at home. Check the link in the show notes for more information about becoming part of the Sunshine Parenting Squad on Patreon. Hello and welcome to episode 161. I'm coming to you live from my home office with a couple of dogs and 2 of my kids who are my guests today on the podcast. So this is something I've never done before. I've had, I believe I had Meredith on in the past. We talked about the Enneagram, and I had Gretchen talking about teaching from home during the beginning of COVID. But today I actually am joined by my oldest daughter, Gretchen, and my youngest child, my son, Owen, who turned 17 last month. And we're just going to have a little chat, the 3 of us here, because here we are together during COVID. So welcome to the podcast, kids.
Thank you, Mom. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't we start by just you guys introducing yourselves, just saying like how old you are, what you're doing, and where you are in this family of ours.
I'm Gretchen, and I'm 26 years old, and I'm the oldest of the 5. And I've been living at home for the first time in a long time since mid-March, and it's been a wild ride.
I'm Owen. I'm 17, junior in high school, and I've also been at home for a while now.
And something a little unusual about Owen that I don't know that I've ever talked about it on the podcast, but Owen actually goes to a boarding school. And one of the reasons that I don't talk about it on the podcast is because a lot of people perceive boarding school as being for like kids who've done something wrong or are going into rehab or something. So Owen, can you explain like why you're at boarding school, why you wanted to go?
Well, the school here, it just wasn't, my thing, and boarding school just like appealed to me. And I thought I'd try it out, and it's a lot of fun.
What do you like about being away from home during these particular years?
I like just like living with all my friends and being able to go surfing during free time and just like hang out and live with all my friends. It's really fun.
Yeah. I don't think I've talked about it on the podcast either, but I actually went to boarding school for high school, and I really credit that experience with why I even ended up wanting to run a camp, because it's the same idea. It's like this really close-knit community where you all live together. And for whatever reason, because you spend so much time together at boarding school or summer camp, the friendships are really, really strong. So when Owen asked about wanting to go, I really couldn't say no. And especially after I saw the school and the culture and how it was so focused on kind of the whole child and like all aspects of your well-being. So anyway, so even Owen had to come home because of COVID. So, and that is actually one of the downsides of going to a boarding school, is that now his good friends are spread not only all over the state and the country, but even he has friends in other parts of the world. So you guys are kind of spread out now. But we thought we would just have a chat today about sort of a couple of the things that we talk about a lot in our family, which is how kind of parents evolve over the years, especially in families like ours that have a lot of kids, like in the differences in our parenting of our oldest child and our youngest child. So I just kind of want to hear you guys share your perspective on, obviously Owen wasn't here for, you guys are 10 years apart. So Owen wouldn't remember and wouldn't have been here when you were little, but I think you pretty clearly remember being his age, probably.
Probably. I think one of the things that I think about is the shows and movies we were able to watch, just because I think that's one of the most memorable things that sticks. And I remember when I was 13, almost every PG-13 movie I watched was researched beforehand. And if I was going to go to the movies with friends, I feel like there was more investment in what I was going to see. So I think there was a little bit more restriction when it came to the media I was consuming. And I don't think that's necessarily bad, but I just definitely always had that monitored.
Yes. I think it was actually maybe easier then too, because it was pre-smartphone. So it's like when you were consuming media, it was mostly something on TV or a movie or like a game that we got on like a disc or something.
We also had more rigid TV rules in general. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get a phone until I was 13. And I didn't have a smartphone until I was 18.
Right.
But I just remember Monday through Friday, there was no TV during the weekday.
Right.
Unless we had American Idol as a family.
That was the one exception to the TV policy. Mm-hmm. But it did it seems like that loosened up though. By the end of your high school, we were watching things, more often. But yes, I do remember that. So when thinking about the whole unplugged thing, like we were better about that when you were kids because of the whole no TV, and we didn't have the smartphones. So therefore, you guys probably spent more time just like playing in the playroom and goofing around and that kind of stuff.
And even when I did have a phone, I remember truly keeping it off all day at school, all through high school and middle school, unless I needed to contact anyone. But because it wasn't a smartphone, it was purely for
like calling
communication.
Us. Yeah. Kind of thing. So, okay, so probably closer supervision, especially of like media use. And I would agree with that. I mean, I remember being very like concerned about like, I remember you watching The Magic School Bus when you were little, and like, when are you old enough for whatever? And then Owen, on the flip side of that, I remember once being told by someone like, you let your 6-year-old watch Star Wars or something. And I just remember thinking, and SpongeBob, because people said SpongeBob has just like the way they treat each other isn't good, I guess.
Rugrats. I was never able to watch Rugrats.
Right.
Because who was the older sister? Angelica?
I'd never watched it.
Angelica, or one of the older siblings, said the word stupid a lot.
Oh.
Called other people stupid,
okay.
I think.
So I must have looked that up and then decided, okay. Well, meanwhile, 10 years later, Owen, tell me about your experience with like media and stuff. I think we had a little bit. There were times when we had something going on.
There were some restrictions sometimes for a little short periods at a time.
You're calling it inconsistent?
Perhaps, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. I remember the biggest thing probably, like, limiting screen time on the computer when I would come home from school. It would just like turn off after like 30 minutes.
Oh, I love that thing that Dad set up. It's like the automatic log off.
Yeah, for like movies and stuff, I don't really remember ever having like that many restrictions.
I mean, I'm sure we weren't letting you watch like R-rated movies when you were 12 or anything.
Actually,
oh no!
I think I watched my first R-rated movie with you guys on Halloween,
and it was horrible. I remember that thing.
Yeah, that's probably why it was rated R.
It seemed like it should have been rated worse than that. It was a really horrible experience. I just remember that.
What was the movie?
It was, I don't even remember. We'll have to ask Dad what it was like called.
It was just some horror movie, some like random cheap horror movie.
It was bad. It was one of those ones we should have turned it off, but I don't know. Yeah, so.
But that's pretty much my restriction.
Yeah.
Also for like video games, I think for a while I had my video games screened before I could buy them.
Well, which is appropriate when you're like a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, should you be shooting people like first-person shooter games when you're like 8 or something? Doesn't seem so good. So in general, though, there's like this sense, and I don't know if this happened. I think this does happen in other families, and this is what reminded me is last night we had my in-laws over for dinner, Grandma and Grandpa. And my father-in-law was the youngest of 4 kids in his family. And he said something last night about how he got it really easy from his parents. Like his parents were much easier on him than they were on his 2 older sisters. And it got me kind of thinking about how, I know for me, part of it is I think I'm just like more tired and older. Like I just don't have the energy to maintain that kind of monitoring and structure that maybe I did. But I'm also more relaxed and I kind of trust the process too. Like I kind of realize that it's not going to be from me telling you not to do something or keeping a control in place that you're going to make good decisions later. Do you know what I mean? Like, what do you think? Like, what do you think is most helpful to being the kind of person who, when you're not at home anymore, makes good decisions? Owen, why don't you go first, since you're more in the thick of like the time when people, as we've talked about. What have I told you about age 17?
That's when most kids like die from stupid things.
Male children. It's called, there's a mortality bump.
Yeah.
And do you know kind of why that is? Like, do you remember why I explained?
The synapses, they're connecting. Our brains aren't developed. We don't have that good, what's it called? Like critical
executive,
thinking.
yeah. Executive function. It's more that I think also too, your risk tolerance is really high. Like you know things are dangerous, but at the same time, when you're with your friends, things sound so fun that you're like, oh, let's just go for it. You know what I mean? Like you see something and it's like, oh yeah, it's risky, but we're all here and this is going to be a great story kind of thing. So anyway, so yeah, that's what I worry about most with you. So we just have to get past this year, which hopefully...
I'll be at home.
Yeah. Hopefully you won't. Hopefully you won't. So talk about your relationship, because I think it'd be interesting for people to hear about your relationship as siblings, being the oldest and the youngest of 5 total.
Well, I think what's most interesting, right before we started our official podcast broadcast, we were talking about how we've never had an argument before. I was trying to ask Owen if he could think of one time that we were mad at each other, and I can't think of one, because we're 10 years apart, and so there really was nothing ever to fight about. And it's been great now that Owen is older. We're getting to the point where it will feel closer and closer to just being similar in age.
Right.
And so that gap is closing, which is fun. I feel like I can talk to Owen about a lot now.
Yeah.
Now that we live together too.
Yeah. And your friends like Owen, mm-hmm. and Owen's friends like know you and mm-hmm. talk to you and stuff too. So it's kind of a fun thing. Yeah, I think that's good. Well, I will say, just so people don't get the wrong impression, you have both had issues with other siblings who are closer in age to you.
That's true.
So in terms of that, though, one of the things all parents really want is for their kids to at least eventually get along. Like, it's fine how, like, there's some, like, squabbling and fighting and sometimes really getting annoyed with each other in childhood. Mm-hmm. But there are some sibling relationships that are, like, really so much, like, meanness and pain that they never reconcile.
I don't think any 5 of us in any combination have been to the point where we're past the point of reconciliation. I don't think any of us have had serious arguments that go unresolved.
For like a long time.
Yeah. I think one thing that's been interesting for me, especially in the past 5 years, I know Meredith recorded with you about Enneagram, but understanding just that we all have very different personalities, and just having that in the back of your mind helps you get along with siblings better.
Right.
Because sometimes depending on the personality overlap, things will clash, and like typically the same things will come up consistently. Right. So like with Mare being a 1 and me being a 3, that's sometimes going to create like the areas where we usually have conflict are sometimes similar over time.
Right. But I remember you talking about when you were learning to drive, how you liked having Meredith there, right? Yeah. She was like your co-pilot?
She was definitely a co-pilot because I was a little bit more relaxed about the whole process. And so Mare would make sure I made full stops at stop signs. And
she was the one who made sure you knew how to drive.
Yeah.
Well. Yeah. I appreciated that because I thought, this is so funny. Like the too relaxed, like part of the driving.
Well, I think Meredith and I kind of flipped back and forth in the older sibling role.
Oh, yeah.
I think the thing that I always go back to as the oldest that's the hardest is kind of bearing the burden of doing everything first. And I think a lot of that is like internalized mm-hmm. and not necessarily stress that I like talk about with other people.
Right.
But being like the first person to go to middle school,
right.
to go through like puberty,
right.
to start dating, like
right.
having all of those milestones come first, it's like kind of a heavy weight to not have any other sibling doing that.
Right.
And it oftentimes leads to a lot of people making fun of you.
Oh yeah,
and
that's what I used to do with my sister.
It's like a ton of teasing, which
right.
Fortunately I've turned out fine, but
even from the torture,
I feel like the first sibling is tortured a little more.
Yes. I think that could be. I don't know if that's in other families too, but yeah. Okay, so what are some advantages, Owen, do you feel of being the baby of the bunch?
There's a lot of advantages. I just feel like there's a lot less rules.
The wheels have come off here at home.
And it's kind of just, I don't know. I feel like I feel more independent, maybe.
Yeah.
Like there's no one like always like watching me.
Well, do you think there might be a correlation between being like more responsible and mature and independent because you had these older siblings that makes it that you don't really need this, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like
because they're a relation. I just wonder how much that is because I have felt like you haven't really needed a lot of rules. Like tell them the story about what you decided to do with your phone last week. That kind of blew me away because I was like, that's a really good idea. I wish I had thought of that and like
my phone story.
Yeah, about at night.
Oh, I just set it to where on weekdays at like midnight, from like midnight to 8 a.m. it'll just like be on like do not disturb and have like the screen kind of like faded out, and so you can only like access some things.
Yeah, so you put like your own controls, but see, like that was an example mm-hmm. of what that like just again reassures me that you don't need the rules. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think too, don't you think that Owen, because of having all these older siblings, kind of got mature faster? Like he hung around a lot with older kids. He got dragged around to a lot of different activities that, like the academic decathlon. I mean, mm-hmm. he was in the audience at your academic decathlon.
I remember that.
Holding up a sign for like, so
hours.
He was probably for hours in the bleachers watching people take tests.
I feel like, and because you're just dragged around in the car so much, I feel like you do need to be a more flexible person when you're younger.
Oh, probably.
Because you're going to everyone's sports events and academic decathlon.
Yeah.
But I just feel like Owen is so self-sufficient. Like, I mean, today he built a desk. And
that was pretty cool.
One time, when I had a friend over one time, he was just cooking burgers for everyone in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And so and people comment like, wow, he's only 17 and he really does all of this?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think a lot of people are surprised by how mature he is for 17.
Right. So I guess I wonder the correlation of maybe since we have trusted you with more, I don't know if that's led to more, but you were really responsible and cooking and making things and doing stuff. And I don't know about, like, I'm trying to think of other rules. I don't feel like we had like maybe the TV things. I mean, what would you perceive as like, what were our family rules? Like,
the only big ones I remember are, I feel like I had a stricter bedtime. Like, not so much as in high school. I forget when it all went away, but for a long time I remember having a very rigid bedtime routine. Right. For a lot longer than Owen.
I mean, I had a bedtime for a while too. My bedtime was like 7:30 and for like so long.
Well, you guys both know how important sleep is, right? If there's anything I've taught you in life, don't you feel better with a good night's sleep? How much sleep do you guys think you need now? Like, I'm just curious, like, when do you feel like, if you wake up on your own, which I know since Owen, you're
possibly... I sleep too long
if you let yourself?
If I let myself, and then I feel more tired.
But what's your, like, ideal amount?
Like 9 hours.
Yeah, I think that's about what it's supposed to be. I mean, I'm like 8 or 9 hours.
Yeah. I think if I get in bed around 10, I feel good waking up when I need to for work.
At like 6 or something?
Yeah.
It's like 8 hours. Or 7, or something like that. Yeah. Well, I do, I think that was one thing, actually, looking back, and it's funny because that is one of the most important things about parenting is sleep, and a lot of behavior problems of kids, and a lot of learning problems, and attention problems, and eating problems, like even obesity has been linked to not enough sleep. So that was one of my things, but I do remember pushback from siblings who were older saying, why is my bedtime the same? That kind of thing. And that was an awkward thing. But I just remember getting to the point, like, when you're in high school, really, you should be going to bed. Like, oftentimes you had to be up earlier to get to school. So it's kind of weird, but, like, sometimes younger kids, like, older kids almost need to go to bed at the same time as younger kids because of their wake-up time.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate because older kids are on a different sleep schedule.
Right.
Which just goes back to why high school should probably start later and end later.
Yeah.
Even though I love the time schedule right now.
I know, because what time, your students start at what time now?
Well, actually, this has probably been really good for them because the students don't start until 9.
Right.
And we have our work time in the morning.
Right.
And so they are on from 9 to 3. But I know a lot of them stay up really, really late.
Right. But that's... Even if they stayed up till, I know, probably really late. And Owen, your schedule is so totally wacky.
It's too late.
No one else in the world is on your schedule. Late. Explain your school schedule right now.
First period starts at 2 p.m. So.
And then we always have to check if you have one in the last period that goes from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. so we can decide what time to have dinner.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy.
I mean, at least we can get enough sleep.
Yeah, but you don't have to use an alarm, right? Now you just start sleeping.
I still do because I don't want to sleep too much, and then I just rather do my homework in the morning.
Yeah, that's probably smart. That's good. Well, what's your advice, or what are things? I know you guys really wanted to share. Like, what do you want to share? Like my biggest parenting snafus, or things that I did wrong, or what we could do differently, or what we did that you think was a helpful thing, or whatever, anything that you want to share. You have the mic. You can spread. You can tell the world that we're kind of just a normal family that has our ups and downs between siblings and things.
I'm trying to think.
I can't think of any parenting fails.
Well, what about when you look back at, like, your childhood and when you were little? What do you think are some of, like, the things that you're going to remember most? Like, just kind of random thing, Will it be the bedtime stuff and, like, reading or dinners or,
Well, I'm thinking about, like, when I think about consistent things that I want to pass down or that, like, I would do one day.
Yeah.
The positives would for sure be reading every night. And consistent family dinners. At least for some days of the week, depending on what works for people.
Right.
And For sure, bedtimes too, at least when people are younger.
Yeah.
I can't think of a major parenting fail.
Yeah.
I think the one thing for the oldest is there's no one else setting the tone for, like, when anything is going on.
Yeah.
And so it's good to just be kind of in the loop with other moms and parents and talking about what other kids their age are going through.
Right.
Because there's really no one else there for support.
Right.
When you're the first person to do anything and everything. Well, if that makes sense.
No, it doesn't. I think also, I mean, it tends to be a firstborn thing, I think. Although I'm sure it's not always. But, like, really trying to set a really high standard. So that's just, like, a lot of responsibility to feel like, oh, my gosh, I'm supposed to, like, everyone's watching me, how I do this. And, yeah, that is tough. Mm-hmm. It's weird because in my family, I always felt more like the older sibling.
Huh.
You know? I think I have more of an older sibling personality than a younger one, but I don't know. Okay, Owen, what's it like right now being 17 and in COVID?
Times are tough.
Among your friends, though, it seems like you guys are staying connected pretty well, and, like, no one's in the depths of despair at this point.
No, we stay connected. It's just rather be at school.
Of course.
It's more fun.
Well, what can parents do when they're stuck, when you're stuck with your parents and you're kind of during that age where you'd rather be with your friends? Just mostly you just want us to leave you alone? Like, what's the best technique during COVID to support high school kids who are at home?
I mean, some interaction is good. Like, I don't know. We watch like some TV shows and movies and stuff.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about it and do some of that stuff. But most of the time, it's nice to just be on my own. Mm-hmm. And then just, like, talk to my friends and play games with them and stuff like that, which is nice.
I've just been trying to keep you stocked up on chocolate milk.
Yeah.
And mango juice.
Got good snacks.
Yeah, make sure there's good snacks around. All right, well, this has been fun. This has been good to just chat with you here in the library. We should do some other topics. We should ask the listeners what they want to hear about from your perspective on life, at this stage, because I think people like to hear it. But I appreciate you guys. I learn a lot from you, and it's really chill being your parents, especially during this time. Like, it's really nice having you guys home. And I'm really grateful that you're not, like, little tiny kids right now, because I feel like COVID would be a lot harder for people with young kids. It's
been awesome. I think as someone who lived very independently for 7 or 8 years, I'm very surprised by how much I love being home.
Aww.
And I love having this time with my parents and my brother, and it's just such a unique opportunity that oftentimes you don't get just in the middle of your 20s to have family time again. Yeah. So I'm definitely appreciating it and not planning on leaving anytime soon.
Yeah, selfishly, I'm really enjoying it too, but I feel bad for Owen because I know it's not as enjoyable for him. You know what I mean? But you're still pretty good-natured about everything.
It's not terrible.
Well, that's good.
You get good food.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's not terrible. By the way, that's like the highest form of a compliment from a 17-year-old. It's not terrible. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. If you guys want to do your own episode sometime, the two of you, do you want to just host one day? Maybe, it would be really fun. Can we get all the siblings together?
We might have to do that remotely, but we can make that work.
Get some of them, like, hooked up via Zoom and you guys live, and you guys could just do one without me there. Think about that?
I don't know. We'd have to come up with our topics.
Yeah, that would be good. All right, everyone, that was Gretchen Monkey, Owen Monkey, my oldest and my youngest kids. Thanks for listening.
As always, you can find notes, links, and other resources related to today's conversation by visiting my website at sunshine-parenting.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for my email list so that you don't miss out on any of the great resources I have available for raising thriving kids. If you enjoyed this episode and appreciate the podcast, there are a few ways that you can help me out. One is by sharing this episode with a friend who you think might enjoy it. Another way you can support Sunshine Parenting is by leaving a review on iTunes. Reviews are very important for helping podcasts find their audiences, and I would love your support in helping people find Sunshine Parenting. My favorite for this week just has to be the book by Adele Faber and Elaine Maslish, Siblings Without Rivalry: How to Help Your Children Live Together So You Can Live Too. It is a really old copy that I have here. It's all yellowed. It looks like it's from, I don't even know what year. But I remember reading this book, really wanting to make sure that my kids got along somewhat when they were kids. And one of the main things I remember from it is the Perils of Comparison, which is one of the things, is really trying to focus on how each person is individual and has their own strengths, and pointing out the things that you really enjoy about them, rather than ever saying things like, oh, I wish you could play soccer like, some sibling. So that was one thing that I learned from this book. And then the other thing, which I think is so funny because I've seen kids do this so many times, that like where you take a role because of a role someone else is doing. So like in our family, for sure, it happened sometimes where one person was like in trouble or doing something bad, and then the other person starts acting like an angel. But it can go to like extremes where kids and families can really feel like labeled as like the one who always gets in trouble or the one who makes mistakes or whatever. So just being aware that we need to not label our kids. Anyway, it's a really great book. Also, you can check out some past episodes that I did with Sarah Koulias about siblings and sibling conflict, because I think this is a really important topic and one that we want to address in our families so that our kids grow up to eventually get along and become good friends. Because I often think about how after we're gone, they're going to just have each other, and that's going to be like their family. And so I really do want my kids to feel close to their siblings when they're adults. So that's my favorite for this week. Let's end with a quote from my book, Happy Campers. Creating a close and connected family culture that promotes positive, lifelong relationships is the most important thing we can do for our children. Warm and supportive parent-child relationships, a sense of being loved, and help and support from family members serve as protective factors and increase children's resilience and their ability to face many of life's inevitable challenges. I'm Audrey Monkey. Thank you for joining me for the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. Join me again next week for more conversations about raising kids who become thriving adults.